everyone, I am Kimberly, the 5-Minute NP. The 5-Minute NP was born out of my belief that small, incremental changes can drastically change the trajectory of your life. Our genes do not have to determine our lifespan. My goal through this podcast is to act as a roadmap that bridges the gap between knowledge and action, leading to you living your healthiest, happiest, longest life. Welcome to the 5-Minute NP podcast. Hello, everyone. Today, I discuss chronic inflammation as the root cause of most diseases, including diseases like heart disease, Alzheimer's, and autoimmune disorders. Dr. LaMandre is my guest. She is a functional nurse practitioner, and she devotes her practice to helping others get to the root causes of why they are so tired and generally don't feel well. In this episode, she goes into more detail about what we know about inflammation, what it's doing to our bodies, what tests we can have done, and ways we can reduce inflammation and improve our health and quality of life once and for all. It really amazes me how many things are causing damaging inflammation in our body, including aging in itself, and how bad it makes us feel. I know it was making me sick, but actually using some of these targeted changes Dr. E talks about today, I was able to decrease my own pain and inflammation and get my own life back. I know this information will prove valuable to you. Thank you so much for being here. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast so we can share in this health and longevity journey together. Welcome to the 5-Minute NP podcast. Welcome, Dr. LaMandre. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. How are you?
I'm doing good. Happy to talk with you. I've been looking forward to this discussion.
Likewise. And I just want to let you know that you don't have to call me Dr. LaMandre. Everyone calls me E.
Okay. All right. I will do that. So I thought we would get started with just learning a little bit about you, your background, and what drove you into this field.
Awesome. I love that question. I love telling the story. So bear with me, everyone. This is a good story. You're going to want to hang tight. So I'm a nurse practitioner, and I opened up a primary care practice called EG Healthcare. When you're bored, look us up, EG Healthcare. And it's great. It's a great primary care practice, and we're growing, and we serve over 20,000 patients, pediatric, adult, geriatric, you name it. And, you know, along the way, and I'm sure you've had this as a patient, and the listeners here, I'm sure have experienced this. You've gone to your NP, your PA, your MD, and you say, hey, I'm not feeling so great. And your provider says, you're fine. Your labs are fine. Mm-hmm. Everything is fine. And I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably experienced this. So you're told you're fine and you go home. And I was guilty of that. You know, I did my annual for my patients. I did all the guideline driven, testing, and everything was fine. So I sent them on their way, having no idea that I was leaving so much on the table until it got personal. So when I met my wife, she was a vampire. And by that, I mean, not the cool kind of vampire. She wasn't glistening in the sun and she wasn't immortal. That would be really cool. She had has an autoimmune issue called PMLE. It stands for polymorphous light eruption. And that basically means that she's allergic to the sun.
Wow. So
like all of us, that was the first diagnosis. So we may do, right? We just, okay, so we don't go out in the sun. We go out in the evening. We don't, we figure out, how to cover ourselves. And like many of your listeners, I'm sure when the first ache started or maybe the first diagnosis, you're like, I can power through this, and you just keep going, right? And so I'm sure many of you can connect with that. Like, it's going to be fine. We'll figure it out. This will not break us. And then you get the second diagnosis or the second place that hurts you or the second medication. So for us, she got psoriasis, and her psoriasis was specific to her hands and feet. So she couldn't button her clothes. If she walked too long, her feet would bleed. And so we were like, okay, maybe we're not that strong, and maybe we should start looking for answers. So we tried medicine. She's in medicine. She's a PA. I'm an MP. All our friends are in medicine. And you know the drill. They offered us, typical kind of high dose steroids. Not against medication. When you get to know me, you'll see that. Mm-hmm. But it's not what we wanted. We wanted to know what was causing it. Mm-hmm. And no one can give us that answer. Mm-hmm. So we stumbled upon functional medicine, and we rolled our eyes heavily because that's just nonsense, right? That's what we thought. Mm-hmm. And so we went to this guy, it's functional medicine doctor in Manhattan, and he did some crazy blood work on us and said, you need to change your diet. What? Change your diet? No one in med school, nursing school, if you're a provider listening, you never heard that diet has anything to do with psoriasis or with any autoimmune issue. But we had nothing to lose. So we did it. Her hands cleared up, her feet cleared up, and now we can be out in the sun. And it was within months, our whole life changed. And that's when I realized I have to bring this back to my patients. So I went back to school, and then eventually I got my doctorate, and I'll tell you more about that in a bit. But I realized that there was so much more that I could offer my patients. And when they say that they're not feeling fine, that just having negative results is not the answer. I know it was a long answer for your question, but I wanted to put it all out there.
So I would like to dive into that just a little bit more on the functional side of it. What would you say are the main differences? I mean, what is the main difference between just the normal workup and a functional workup?
It's a great question. So primary care and all specialists, they look for disease. So they're not wrong. You're going to hear me say this over and over again. You have to always start there. You have to look for disease, right? Let's just say you're fatigued. You want to make sure you're not anemic. You want to make sure something. So you have to look for disease. So primary care testing by design looks for disease. If it's not there, you're good to go. I'll see you next year. I'll see you in 3 months. Functional medicine is looking for causes of unwellness. But why are you not feeling well? Great. You don't have anemia. You don't have the thyroid issue, but you're fatigued. Why? So, okay, we don't have a disease. What's going on? What's the underlying cause? And for many of us, that's inflammation. And we could test for inflammation. We could test for inflammation, but the reason we don't do it in primary care is because there's no medicine for it. So what am I going to do? Tell my patient, oh, you have inflammation. Great. See you later. Right. So it's a provider issue, but it's also a patient issue because many patients don't want to know information that they feel they can't do anything about. So the primary difference is looking for that root cause of the unwellness, which a lot of times has to do with inflammation and testing for it.
I hear so much of that, even just with providers, that kind of blame almost in a sense that they're not helping me get well. They're not, it's kind of their fault. And I have a hard time with that too, and I feel like, you can't look to your provider for everything, so just knowing the different types, like, hey, maybe I'm seeing the wrong provider, that's helpful. And a lot of people need to use insurance, and is functional medicine typically covered under standard insurance plans?
You brought up so many good points in this question. Let's first start with the first part. There's a tendency, like you said, to blame the doc, blame the NP, blame the PA. And you really can't for some reason. First of all, you are not going to go to a mechanic for your plumbing issues, right? So you have to know when you're going what their toolbox is. So when you're going to urgent care, for example, this is not the right place for you if you have chronic issues, right? You're there because you're sick and you need a medication. Primary care, right? You try. Primary care, again, it's about screening, it's about prevention, but you have to know kind of what's in the toolbox. But there's also patient driven, because a lot of patients are fine with just the way it is. They don't want to give up their pizza or their ice cream. They want the medication so they continue to live their life. So a lot of patients are fine with it. For the patients who want more, they need to find someone with different tools in their toolbox. So I really agree with you that a lot of it is patient driven, because I still do primary care. I still see 70 plus patients a day in primary care in our practice who are fine with it the way it is. And then there are some who want more. Insurance is a really good question. This is a systemic problem. This is not any particular functional provider trying to, get rich off of illness. The problem is that the system does not pay for wellness. Right? It pays for ICD-10 codes. Right. If you don't have an ICD-10 code, if you don't have a diagnosis, there's no payment.
Unwell is not a diagnosis, I guess.
Unwell is not a diagnosis, right? So if you don't have a sickness, you can't prove the patient's sick, You don't get paid, right? The system is designed to be sick care.
Yeah.
And yes, you can have like one wellness visit a year.
Right.
And then you're done. God
Right.
forbid you want to come again for something like that.
Yeah.
So it's designed for sick care. So it leaves no room for providers, right? Because providers also have to put their kids through college and put food on the table. It leaves no room for them to make income through insurance.
Right.
So you, as a savvy patient, you can utilize your insurance as much as possible to get the blood work that you might need and ask for certain questions. And then you might be able to bring those results to a functional medicine provider. It tends not to be covered by insurance. But let me tell you, if you have a good provider, it's worth it because you're going to get one-on-one attention for an extended amount of time, not just 5 minutes in and out. So if that's what you're looking for, there are things that we spend our money on that are far less of value. So it's something to consider.
I gotcha. Yeah, you're right about that. So someone seeing a functional provider, how often is the follow-up? Like, do you watch them rather than once a year? Is it more frequent? Are you testing certain things more frequent?
So I imagine each provider is different. We have a very specific method. And if you want, I'll talk about it now. But what I designed, because I come from a space of conventional medicine and a space that's data-driven and kind of systemic, I wanted to recreate that in functional medicine so it doesn't feel, kind of throwing spaghetti on the wall. I want it to really be trackable. So what we do, and I know we're jumping ahead, but that's okay. We're here now.
Okay. Yeah.
Is we work with our patients for at least a year because change does not happen in 30, 60, 90 days. If you're on a 30, 60, 90-day program, just take your money back and just run because it's not happening, right? It took you this many years to become a mess. It's going to take you more than 30, 60, 90 days.
Right. Give it time.
So we work with our patients for a year. And what we do, the first thing that we do is we do very extensive blood work. I said extensive, not expensive. I'm going into my microphone here.
Yeah. And hopefully that's covered, that part.
Yes. And then we also do saliva testing, which is not covered, but we really want to check your adrenals and something called adrenal fatigue.
Okay.
And then we use a very cool software that tracks your symptoms. We sit down for an hour and we go over line by line, your blood work, your saliva test. We create a plan that's customized for the patient, right? Because each patient's different.
Right.
You're one size fits all. Then to answer your question, it's really methodical. Once a month, they sit with me. Every week they have coaching calls. Why? Because it's not enough to hand somebody a piece of paper and say, I'll see you in 30 days. Lifestyle change needs support, requires support. So we created a system of support because people are like, hey, can I eat this? Can I eat this? Hey, I'm constipated. I have a headache. What should I do? I have a wedding. Right? You need that kind of real-time support. And then we track labs every 2 months because we want to see that we're moving. And we're tracking symptoms every month. And that's important for those of you out there listening. Hey, why would you track my labs? My labs are fine. You're right. For some of you, your labs are fine. So we're tracking your symptoms. Did your headache get better? Did it go from a 4 to a 3 to a 2 to a 1 to a 0? Because those symptoms are important just because I can't find a lab to it, right? So
right. I mean, the goal is to feel better.
The goal is to feel better. So for us, it's a monthly, weekly basis.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I got you. That's good. That's good. And I think that's part of the downfall of primary care is they can't follow up on you so closely, even when it comes to weight loss or something that requires accountability and a check-in and, not just like, good luck. And then the next year they come in, like, they're still obese. I mean, what you been doing for a year?
What happened? What'd you do?
Exactly. Where did you fall off the cliff? I mean, I told you to lose weight. Okay, I got you. So that's what you call the new method, right?
So the new method is spelled with a K, right? The new method, because the idea is that you, the patient, always knew there was a better way.
I love that.
So thank you. So it's the new method. And it's really about empowering patients to realize that their symptoms are not in their head. You're not fine.
Right.
Right. So come on in and we help you figure out. And then that feeling and that I knew it moment is why we call it the new method. So I think I don't remember your question anymore.
I don't either. It's okay.
Okay.
It's okay. All righty. No, I was asking about the new method. and what you provide for the patients.
Okay, thank you. So now that we know the name is the new method, so what we provide as is first of all that aha moment. That first, we call it our discovery session. That moment where we're going through your blood work, your saliva, and your symptoms, and we're like, hey, this is what's going on. Look, you have inflammatory issues. Look, you have adrenal fatigue. Look, even though your A1C is good, which is your diabetes marker, look, you have insulin resistance. These are things that we can test for. Hey, look, everyone's telling you your thyroid's okay, but guess what? You have antibodies to thyroid. Your thyroid is cooking, right? So the first thing that I would say that we provide our patients is this moment when they're like, holy cow, I'm not crazy.
Right.
Like that feeling of just, and they're like, because we give them a booklet, a really cool booklet of all their results. And they're like, I can't wait to bring this home to my husband, my wife, my partner, right? To let them know that I'm not crazy. There's a reason why I feel this way.
Right.
So that first feeling, that confirmation, I think is what we provide them. And then it's the particular program for them. But I really think what makes us different is the level of support. It is so hard to make changes. By the way, if you guys are watching this, I'm a thin person. I was not always thin. I used to be obese 20 years ago. So I know the struggle. I know how hard it is to get here. And I mention that because you want someone who knows how hard it is, right?
Right, exactly.
And which is why I created this level of support, because left to your own devices, when the angel and devil shoulders start talking, the donuts win.
Right. Right. They're drawing you in.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into the topic of inflammation. And it is such a big topic right now. I feel like it's just this huge, discovery that chronic inflammation is the underlying cause of a majority of chronic diseases. And I almost feel like you're hearing it so much that it might just be like, okay, whatever that means. So what is chronic inflammation? How could you describe, I guess, what exactly is happening to us, causing us to become inflammatory? I mean, like maybe the mechanism.
Sure. I'm really glad that you mentioned, first of all, before I answer your question, that we hear it all the time, because sometimes, because you're kind of in an inflammatory business and I'm in an inflammatory business, we think we hear it all the time. Yeah. But I have patients who come to me and say, I've never heard of this. So I want to empower you for a moment to let you know, keep talking about it, because I keep thinking, wow, everybody must know about this. And people don't. And they're still searching. So what you're doing is really so important to the unwell community at large. So thank you for doing this. Okay, so let's talk about inflammation. Inflammation is a necessary part of our body. There's good inflammation. If you fall down and hurt yourself and your knee gets red and swollen, that's important. It has to happen. That's your body bringing healing stuff to the area so that it could heal. And then in a few weeks, that redness goes away. Super important. Okay. So good inflammation we would be dead without it. Right. You need inflammatory response, healing response, done, moving on. The inflammation that we're talking about is chronic inflammation. It's when all these inflammatory cells that come into the area and they don't stop. And there's nothing to attack, right? There is no injury. So it starts to attack the self, which is why it's connected to autoimmune. When it starts to attack the self, it's autoimmune. When it starts to attack your skin, it's psoriasis or eczema. Right? When it starts to attack your joint, it could be rheumatoid arthritis. When it starts to attack your thyroid, it could be hypothyroidism. When it starts to attack your pancreas, that's diabetes. So chronic inflammation will lead to disease. And the issue is that it takes time. So by the time you get diagnosed with your thyroid or your diabetes or your psoriasis, that's years of inflammation. Remember, I told you by the time you get diagnosed, a lab changes. That's later. By the time your doctor figures it out, it's already kind of like red neon sign. But it takes years to cook. So if you're in that stage where your labs are negative, that's because you're in the inflammatory stage. You're in that stage that didn't show up yet in labs, but you are cooking a disease. So inflammation is a spectrum. It's a spectrum from I don't feel good-itis, my joints hurt, I'm a little tired, brain fog, I just don't feel like my old self, but everyone tells me I'm fine. Or now we have abdominal issues, skin issues, right? So we're kind of in the middle. Oh, my belly always hurts after I'm eating. Skin doesn't look as good. Can't run as much. I'm a little short of breath. And then we actually have when the lab changes, the labs catch up, and now we have a disease. So it's a spectrum. And depending on where you fall on the spectrum is how you'll be treated. If you're already in a disease state, you already get medication. If you're at this I don't feel good state, it's really a lifestyle conversation. And so, that is that's the connection between inflammation and disease. If I may, I just want to give like a kind of two classic examples. One, let's just talk about diabetes, because everyone kind of sort of knows diabetes is sugar. Everyone knows that. So let's just say someone will say, my parents, my grandparents all have diabetes. So, I'm destined to get diabetes. Are you though? You're not really destined. You still have to eat your way there, right? You still have to inflame your way there. Because if your mom and dad don't have diabetes and you're out here eating green juice and running every day, you're not going to get diabetes.
Right.
You have a predisposition to it, but you have to eat your way to it. It's the same thing with other diseases. Let's talk about Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is genetic, but it's also neuroinflammation. You have to live a certain life to turn that gene on. So you could have things that you might be genetically predisposed to, but you have to get yourself there through inflammation. Hope that answered the question.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it's a good point to bring up that if you have inflammation going on in your body, most likely your brain is inflamed as well. And I feel like sometimes we kind of forget the importance of our brain, right? But without it, we're useless. So we have to realize that we're talking also about heart disease, these major things, heart disease, strokes, Alzheimer's, these things in the autoimmune, like the MS and the lupus and all of these things has been tied back to inflammation. So it's huge. And as we age, we have inflammation just through aging. So like with you, it's like, let's get a check on that early so you can be doing these preventative things to prevent problems as you age, because that can already be a risk factor, just aging in itself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So you kind of mentioned a few kind of categories of patients that will come in. One is the patient has inflammation, just not feeling good. Two is, like you said, people want to prevent things. But then three are the people who already are diagnosed with something and want a different approach to it. So all of them can be helped. But you also mentioned another really good point, which is the gut-brain axis. We forget it. We're so focused on heart attack, stroke. But guess what? The same vessels that are in your heart are also in your brain. So when you're looking at the cholesterol panel and you're like, ooh, I don't want to get a heart attack. Hello, how about brain fog?
Right.
And so we keep thinking, oh, it's just my age. I just can't remember where the keys are. It's true. Forgetting your keys is not a sign of Alzheimer's. I don't need anyone panicking.
Right. It happens.
But brain fog is that beginning of that inflammatory spectrum of your brain. Right? And there's a connection. You know how you get nervous and your belly feels like butterflies? Right? That's your brain talking to your belly. Guess what? Your belly talks back. Mm-hmm. When your belly's angry, it makes your brain foggy. And that's a spectrum too, from just from like brain fogginess and forgetfulness all the way down to the end of the spectrum is Alzheimer's. So we don't want to be anywhere on the spectrum.
Right. With the diseases, let's talk a little bit about, I know you mentioned autoimmune disease, and this is really huge because I have talked to people on here that have actually healed themselves from MS and through diet and that kind of stuff. So maybe just touch a little bit about the autoimmune diseases that you've seen and the results you've gotten through using this new method.
Yes, absolutely. I don't want to say anything's curative. That's a dangerous word. But healing yourself to the point of no flare-ups is the goal with autoimmune. So I'm going to talk about, to understand autoimmunity in the functional sense, we need to talk a moment about leaky gut. So leaky gut, it's not physically leaky. Nothing's leaking. You won't see it on an endoscopy. It's a molecular concept. So when I say gut, right, that's not a medical term, but from our mouth to where it comes out is our gut.
And it's a big deal.
It's a big deal. And it has a really important lining, a gut barrier. And the gut barrier's job is to take the nutrients from the food and whatever's not good to get out the other end. And it is such an important job that it takes 40% of our energy at any given moment, even when we're sleeping. So it is constantly working. It is constantly keeping us safe because you're out here eating from the food truck and not dying. There's a reason for that. It's your gut lining.
Right.
But the gut lining for some people gets a little bit weakened. And now that's called leaky gut. And now it allows certain molecules that shouldn't get in to get in. So let's go classically with gluten. And the reason, there's a reason why I'm going with gluten, not because it's a fad, because it's actually a real problem. So let's just say gluten comes through and it's not supposed to come through. And now your body's like, hey, what the heck is this? This is a foreign object. What do we do to foreign objects? When we have a cold or flu virus, our body attacks it and gets rid of the flu virus and is gone. But now we're eating gluten every meal, every meal. We're like, hey, body, here's a foreign object. Hey, body, here's a foreign object. And the body starts creating like this inflammatory cascade because it's like, what the heck is this? What the heck is this? So we're constantly inflamed. Now feeling good, right? That's that beginning stage of the spectrum. Feeling good, maybe have GI issues, some joint issues. But the gluten molecule is very similar to the thyroid molecule. And it's a hop, skip, and a jump in the fancy term called molecular mimicry. And suddenly your body, instead of attacking just the gluten, now turns to the thyroid. So every time that you eat gluten, it is also attacking your thyroid. So what happens is your body starts to produce antibodies to the thyroid. Thyroid antibodies. This is autoimmune thyroid. This is classically Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So Hashimoto's is one of the most common autoimmune issues, especially for women, but men as well. And one of the biggest culprits is gluten, which is why I mentioned it. So you cannot fix someone with thyroid issues. And I'm not talking about medicating. I'm talking about reducing flare-ups and reducing the need to continue increasing your medication. Unless you remove them from gluten. You have to remove gluten out of their life. So I just want to tell your listeners, if you're feeling like you have thyroid issues and you're going to your PCP, they will usually do a test called TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. And if it's fine, guess what? You're fine. Right. Not. So I empower you to ask for a full thyroid panel, which includes thyroid antibodies. Because you can have thyroid antibodies for years before that TSH moves. Now, I just want to take a moment to explain. If your PCP is not a bad guy or girl. Right. It's just that we only use TSH to medicate. So if your TSH is fine, you don't need medication. I'll see you next year. Again, there's no conversation of what's cooking. But if you have thyroid antibodies, it is an opportunity for you to change your lifestyle so that you never get the hypothyroid, so that you never get this Hashimoto's. Okay, so this is a kind of classic example of how what we eat and leaky gut, how it can create a disease.
Real quick, the thyroid, like we get what it does, but why don't you just briefly describe why is the thyroid so important and how do we know it's not working?
Okay. So thyroid does so many things that I would need an entire kind of more than one podcast, but I want you to think of it almost like the thermostat of your body. It produces T4 hormones, which then breaks down to T3 hormones. And the T3 hormone is involved in just about every process in your body. So it's very delicate. You shouldn't have too much and you shouldn't have too little. So if you have too little T3, you're hypo. And if you have too much, you're hyper. Both of them are a problem and both of them are usually autoimmune. So what you would feel like, if you're hyper, and some people will start hyper first. Mm-hmm. These are people who are, thin all the time, naturally thin, no matter what they eat, but also kind of tachycardic. They feel very energetic. Over time, these people's eyes might bulge a little bit. This is if it's for a long time. These people tend not to come to the doctor because they feel great. But they feel great.
They're always running.
They're always running. But it is very, very dangerous as well. I had a patient that had it for many years, and I begged him to get treated, and he didn't because he was just like up all night, able to do work. And then he ended up stroking out because he caused AFib and a whole situation. I don't mean to scare you, but you have to treat it even if you feel great. Okay. So that's hyperthyroid. What more common though is hypothyroid. That patient tends to have really difficulty losing weight. Like I'm on this diet, I'm really counting my calories, nothing's budging. They're tired, their hair is thin. Sometimes the ends of their eyebrows gets thinner and they don't understand why. They just feel like they're dragging. Now, of course, that could describe a lot of things. So I don't want you to, if you have these things, to think you have thyroid. It's a pretty simple test to do. But that generally they'll come in and just be like, I'm exhausted. I can't lose weight. My hair is thinning and, help me.
Right. And it's so common for people to feel this way. And it can become so depressing because you feel like, I feel just bad and I don't feel like I can get help.
Right.
You get your levels and you're fine. You're like, it's not my thyroid. So now I just feel bad.
Right. So now, and I'm just lazy, right? So people will be like, maybe I should just exercise more and do something more. Right. So if you have antibodies, again, if your thyroid is normal, you're going to start feeling the symptoms of hypothyroid, even though you're not hypothyroid, because your body's struggling to produce the T3, right? So you're being attacked from like your belly, and then your body's like, I got this. I'm still producing the T3, but it's a struggle. So you're going to start feeling symptomatic, even though your labs are okay, which is a great time to intervene. By the way, even if you're already on medication, you still want to intervene because the goal is not to come off medication. Unfortunately, once you're on medication, you're probably going to stay on medication for thyroid, not for everything else. But our goal is to make sure that we don't keep increasing you every year, that we never get to 200 micrograms. Our goal is to keep you at 25 or whatever dose you're in, right, to make sure they don't continue to flare. Right. So either way, I empower you to try this.
Right, definitely. Let's just talk a little bit about the top causes of inflammation, like what's going on, what's causing it.
Yes. Okay. So the top causes of inflammation, for sure, we have to talk about diet. I mean, I know I kind of said it already, but I have to make sure that we mention it. So diet. When we're eating junky food, processed foods, even if we don't have leaky gut, our body's really busy processing it, really dealing with the toxins. And when our body's busy dealing with toxins, it gets inflamed. The next thing is sleep. I know we don't really prioritize sleep, but sleep is a really big deal. When we sleep is when we heal. It takes an opportunity to regenerate, we repair. There is this really cool thing in our brain called a lymphatic system, which is kind of like a drainage. And that drainage only happens when we're in deep sleep. So, and there's kind of like this thing in our society, like, oh, don't sleep, get more done, right? The most successful sleep people don't only sleep 4 hours a day, right? There's a kind of like this idea that if you want to sleep, you're weak. Quite the opposite is true. You need to sleep. If you don't sleep, you don't have the opportunity to repair everything you went through while you're awake. And that's inflammation, right? Think about how you feel one night of not sleeping well. Mm-hmm. Imagine, compound that your whole life. So you're just going to feel, right, suboptimal and going to cause inflammation. And then there's the microbiome. So I was talking about leaky gut, and that's about letting bad stuff through. But the microbiome is literally the world of bacteria, viruses, and fungi that live in your belly. And they're supposed to be there. Okay. You think you're you, but you're mostly other pathogens. They're supposed to be there. There's some good guys in there. There's some bad guys in there, and they need to live in harmony. And if they don't live in harmony, that's called dysbiosis. If there's not enough of the good bacteria, too much overgrowth of the bad bacteria, and sometimes even too much overgrowth of the good bacteria, that causes dysbiosis. And dysbiosis causes inflammation. So making sure that, all the troops in the belly are exactly the way they're supposed to be. And then, of course, there's stress. And stress is not just, listen, I know life is stressful. I'm not telling you that every day you have to go out to the forest to meditate, although that would be nice.
That would be amazing.
And I know that stress is there, but stressors that we can control or stressors that we can mediate, and stressors, physical stressors, like, do we have to eat all that food? Because that's a stressor also. Do we have to overdo it at the gym and then get injured? That's a stressor also. So stressing out your body depletes that cortisol level, which again causes inflammation. So there are certainly more causes of inflammation. And then of course, I'm sorry, I have to just say this one, pathogens. If you're walking around not knowing that you have Lyme disease, if you're walking around not knowing that you have H. pylori, which is common in the belly, and so your body's constantly fighting it, that's another source of inflammation. So this is where to start if you're trying to figure out what your source of inflammation is. You got to sleep better, you have to eat better, make sure your belly is on point, and find out if you're infected with something.
Right. That all sounds wonderful. But in real life, that is difficult for people. So I come to you, I don't feel well, and the doctor may say, well, you got to go to sleep, you got to eat better. And by the way, don't get stressed out, blah, blah. So what are some of let's start with a little bit one by one, top foods that you say, because I personally don't believe there's one diet fits all approach.
Agreed.
I'm not I don't love talking about nutrition because it's like a religion. And if you say the wrong thing, but there are top inflammatory foods. There are things that we know cause inflammation, and it's a very common cause for a lot of people. So maybe just briefly list a few of those top inflammatory known triggers that we could kind of talk about real quick. That would give people a general idea of like, hey, this besides, we all know sugar, junk food's not good for us, but maybe be a little more specific on that area.
Okay. So first of all, I agree with you. It's not a one size fits all. It should never be. In fact, one of the tests we do is called APOE. APOE is a test for predisposition to Alzheimer's.
Okay. Is that APO4?
Yeah. 4 would be Alzheimer's.
Okay. Because my uncle just texted me the other day and said, my other uncle has that gene. So.
Okay. Yeah. So you can get yourself tested. Right. And for those of you out there who might say like, oh, I don't want to know, you do want to know, because just because you have the gene doesn't mean you're going to express it. Right. This is not like brown eyes, blue eyes. There are certain genes that, depending on our lifestyle, we may not express. Alzheimer's gene is one of them.
You bring up a good point. I was literally just thinking about this last night, about all these abilities to test all these genes now. Is it helping us, or is it causing more anxiety? That just came.
No, it's okay.
It's a big deal. Like, hey,
big deal. I think testing for genes that we know currently that would be something we could do for makes sense. Testing for some of the genes that they do in like 23andMe, where just like, I don't know. I think that causes anxiety, right? So if there's no actionable thing, once you get it, I would caution you, because then it was just going to cause you anxiety. But APOE is very actionable, because we know that people with APOE4 are more likely to get Alzheimer's. By the way, you still can get it if you have APOE3, but it's just, you have to work harder. Kind of like diabetes. You can still get diabetes without it being genetic, right? You just have to eat more. But APOE4, you want to make sure you have to double down. You have to double down on the anti-inflammatory. There's just no room. There's no wiggle room. My wife has APOE4, so I know the life. So it shouldn't be a one size fits all. In fact, APOE4, and some people might disagree with me, but I really don't think they should be on a very high meat diet. I'm not telling you they have to be vegan, but they should be super anti-inflammatory, as plant-based as possible. Again, anyone who's listening, I'm not telling everyone to be vegan, but APOE4s have to be more plant-based than meat. Okay. So it's really, really specific to what you're doing. And also specific to where you're starting. If you're someone who's still on McDonald's, I'm not going to be talking to you about where you're sourcing your organic tomatoes. Right? Let's talk about better choices at McDonald's, right? So it really depends where we are. Can we maybe get the grilled chicken instead of like the fries and burger? And then my patient who's already like, super organic, I'm going to start talking about what containers are we putting our food in? Should we use plastic containers, right? So it really depends on your starting point also. So generally speaking, we're talking about what we do at the TheKnewMethod is we start off rather restricted for two reasons. One, it's when you're most motivated. So I'm going to grab you when you're most motivated. And two, if I restrict initially, is when you're going to feel the best. The caveat to that is if you have other issues going on, You're going to feel the best. You're going to feel amazing quickly. So you're going to realize that this is the right path. You're going to have that immediate feedback that says, holy cow, I can feel this amazing. And then we methodically reintroduce foods based on your symptoms. So if I reintroduce eggplants and suddenly your psoriasis comes back, well, even though eggplants is healthy, it's not healthy for you.
Right.
So it's really, really customized. But I know you want some general guidelines. So general guidelines is I always remove gluten. I always remove dairy. I initially will try, for most patients, try to remove some legumes. And then we tailor it from there, and then we slowly go up. But if I'm not mistaken, I think your question is more about one of the podcasts I did recently, which is the 6 foods you should never eat. If that's where you want me to go, I will go there for now,
Well,
but because that's a little different.
I feel like that was really helpful. But yeah, I definitely agree with the dairy, and people go around and around on that, and meat. And the studies I've researched, it says they're both inflammatory, but then you do see people do well on keto. You do see, so I do think that's true. But yeah, I just thought you could mention I think gluten you mentioned, dairy you mentioned, just also, I felt like it was important to mention, we hear about sugar a lot, but not as much about high fructose corn syrup.
Okay.
That's in so much and what that's doing to us.
Yes. So let's talk about that. So generally for the new method, we're talking about a really kind of like whole food based, very customized to the patient. But if you're just kind of looking for general, never eat, and this is just never for everyone. And this is one of those things that we can all agree on. First part is trans fat. Okay. Trans fat, for those of you who don't know, is something that companies just created to make their life easier. Think of French fry grease. If you ever try to refry your French fries every day, your grease will get disgusting, right? You can't use it again. French fry grease never gets bad. It just stays there forever. It's like chemically produced to be cheaper and reusable. But guess what? It's a mess for your health, and it's everywhere. Right? It lowers your HDL, it raises your LDL. It's a hot mess. So the US FDA realized it's a problem. And so they kind of sort of banned it, in that they said, as long as you can write that you have 0 trans fat, even if you have 0.5 trans fat per serving. So that means that you're taking a package that says 0 trans fat. You're like, oh, I'm good. I have 0 trans fat in these cookies. But it really has 0.5 per serving, times how many servings. Before you know it, you had 40 grams of trans fat. So it's a loophole. So 0 trans fat, just run their line. Because if they're writing it, there's a reason they're writing it. Right. So trans fat, high fructose corn syrup that you mentioned. Again, this is one of those things that companies were like, hey, sugar's super expensive. And it's kind of hard to dissolve in cold things. Like you can't dissolve cold water in sugar, right? You ever try that at home? It doesn't work. Can we come up with something that's cheaper than sugar, sweeter than sugar, and we can just use all the time? High fructose corn syrup. And you might get confused because fructose, it's fruit. It's not bad for you. Well, the fructose in fruit is good for you, but you'll never eat as much fruit as is needed to make the syrup.
Right.
So high fructose corn syrup, it's cheap, it's sweet, and anything you think about sugar, multiply it by 4 million times. Right. So it makes you insulin resistant, makes you more likely to be diabetic, increases your appetite because you have this big burst of sugar. So now you're like, oh my God, you get this insulin rush, which tells you you're hungrier. So you're actually eating more. So it gives, then you're eating more calories because you'll never have this much sugar in an item as you do with high fructose corn syrup. So it just makes you unhealthier. It promotes obesity. So it's high fructose corn syrup.
It's my understanding, like our body knows what to do with sugar, but our liver doesn't know, it doesn't process fructose, I don't believe. I feel like I remember reading that and I was like, that's kind of a big deal. Like our body doesn't know what to do with it,
So it's not exactly that it doesn't know what to do with fructose. It doesn't know what to do with this amount. So what happens is it gets broken down to glucose, and then we need glucose to live, right? So we have glucose, so we have it. Then insulin picks it up and brings it to the cell and says, hey, cell, I got you some cool glucose. And cell's like, great, thank you so much. But then we're eating too much of it, right? Too much of the high fructose corn syrup. So the insulin keeps trying, says, hey, cell, I have all the sugar for you. And the cell's like, dude, I don't need any more. That is the first part. That's insulin resistance. That's when the cell says to insulin, I can't handle it anymore.
Yeah. Okay.
Then when the insulin keeps trying, so the body's pumping out more insulin, it's going to try, it's going to keep trying, it's going to keep trying, and the cells can't handle it anymore. So then the insulin's like, well, what do I do with all the sugar that I have? It drops it in the blood. That's diabetes, finger stick diabetes, because now it doesn't know what to do with it. And because the liver also doesn't know what to do with it, it starts to coat the liver in fat. And that's your fatty liver and other organs called visceral fat. So it's just an overload and it doesn't know what to do with it. So it just starts storing it in fat in places that shouldn't have fat, which is how it contributes to obesity and to visceral fat, meaning fat surrounding the organs. So it's a hot mess, high fructose corn syrup.
But that's a great picture you just painted of what's going on, because that's another thing. Insulin resistance, we hear all the time, and people don't really know, like, okay, what does that mean? So no, that's a huge thing. Because when you think about insulin, I think of insulin as a storage hormone, and it makes sense. Like, hey, too much of it, maybe I'm going to be storing all this fat.
Yeah, and insulin is kind of like the Uber. It picks up the glucose and brings it to the cell. It's kind of a transporter. And its job is just to keep bringing it to the cell. And when the cells are like, no, we have too much, it's insulin resistant, then you can be insulin resistant for years before your A1C shifts, which is, again, one of those tests we do in functional medicine that we don't do in conventional medicine. And then I'm just going to mention one other food that, again, these are certain things that we could just agree on for everyone. Ultra processed food. So ultra processed food, just to understand the difference. There's whole food, let's just say corn. And then there's processed food, which is like corn that you cut off the cob and you put it in a can. It's processed, there's a process, but it's a process that you could do at home. You could make your own canned corn if you wanted to. It was processed food. And then there's ultra processed food, which is like corn chips. Can you make a corn chip at home? No. What the heck's a corn chip? Right. When you look at the ingredients, it's not food. Right. So ultra processed food is not food. It's your microwavable food. It's your quick meal in a box, right? That is not food. But we eat it because it's cheap. It looks good. It's designed to smell and taste good. It is chemically designed to be delicious. But it actually makes us obese because there's no nutrients in it. So our body's like, hey, where's the nutrients? Let me eat some more. So you end up overeating because you're actually not getting any nutrients that your body needs. You're actually overfed but undernourished. So it makes you heavier. And then, of course, because it tastes good, that's another reason why you eat a lot. So these are things that just like, trans fat, high fructose corn syrup, and ultra processed foods. It doesn't matter what diet religion you're in. I think we all could agree on this one.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it is hard for people, honestly, being busy and working, and all of this stuff is so convenient. So what do you eat for breakfast and for lunch, and what that is quick and healthy?
For me personally?
Yeah. What's a day look like where you're eating these whole, for me, I just throw the salad in the work. I take it to work and just throw it together there. Whatever it takes. But what do you do? Because it is hard. Like, you'll always hear that, just eat whole food, stay away from that. But then you look around, it's everywhere. You're in a hurry. And same thing for kids, because it starts way back then.
Oh yeah. So it is hard. Personally, I don't eat breakfast because I do intermittent fasting, and my fasting window, I start eating at 1, and that's a whole other topic. So breakfast is easy for me. But when I used to eat breakfast, I would eat whatever I had left over for dinner for breakfast, because who said you have to eat breakfast foods? Right. But like you, right, I like all you guys listening, I don't have extra time. I don't want you to think I magically have time. I run a business. I have 3 kids. I have 8 cats. Thank you, honey, for rescuing all of them. So busy. So like you, sometimes if I don't food prep, I don't have time for food prep. So that's really cute on Instagram when they have these cute containers. That's not me. Yeah. So I will literally throw things in my lunch bags. Like, I will throw the can of tuna. I will bring the whole tub of mayo with me, right? Good mayo. And then I will bring the cucumber and the tomato with me, and I will chop it up here real quick while everyone's preparing, like microwaving their lunches. I will chop it up. A hard-boiled egg is quick and easy. I'm at a point now where I can have some gluten-free grains, so I'll throw gluten-free toast in the bag. But there are so many options. And I have no financial connection to this company, but I always carry RX bars with me, because you see the ingredients right there. And so especially I travel a lot. So I always make sure that that's the one thing I prep, that there's a snack in my bag all the time. My RX bars are there all the time. Because if I find myself and I can't get somewhere, I can grab that. But really every restaurant has grilled chicken. Mm-hmm. So my staff knows sometimes I'm like, hey, order me lunch. I didn't prepare anything. So they're just like grilled chicken and whatever vegetable, like just order that for me. Like it's really hard these days. You can even go into Qdoba and have grilled chicken on a salad. It is really easy these days to have grilled chicken and something. And if you're a vegan, to have, some sort of tofu or vegan option with a salad. You can get it anywhere these days. You don't even have to prep it. So it's no excuses. It's no excuses. Right. If you're trying to feel better.
Right. And fasting is huge. Everybody does it differently. And, the research is different on it. But that ties in with calorie restriction in general is beneficial for you because, like you were saying, too much food is stressful for us. So it's not going to hurt anybody to cut down a little bit in the food department, probably. I want to jump into sleep real quick because this research is huge on sleep. And it's something that's been undervalued probably for a really, really long time. But there's so much about sleep that people can get anxious about not getting sleep, kind of like myself. Like I know the benefits of sleep. And so I get anxious if I'm like, oh my God, I got to go to bed. It's so good for me. I've got anxiety over trying to get to bed. So what are some things that you recommend to people that can't sleep that need to?
Okay. So the first is the understanding the importance of sleep. Because I think one of the things is we don't prioritize sleep. Because anyone listening to this, you already took some time out of your day to listen to this. You're obviously on the path to something. So there's something in your life that you feel is a priority for your health. The first part of getting sleep is recognizing that it's a priority. And recognizing priority means that you're going to take the steps throughout the day to get your sleep at night. So let's talk about why it's so important. Like, I get it, lady, I don't want to be tired, but brain function is important. This is the reason why casinos don't have windows. They don't want you to realize it's late and there's no clocks, and they don't want you to go to sleep because they know that when you're tired, you start making poor decisions, high risk decisions. So brain function, if you're not sleeping, you're not making good decisions. If you're a career person, you're not making good decisions. Taking care of your kids, you're not making decisions because you're exhausted. Emotions, you're an emotional wreck. You are more likely to fly off the handle. You know what it's like when you had 2 hours of sleep because you had a flight and you're like cranking everyone. It's the same if you're constantly just a little sleep deprived. If you really need 7 hours and you go for 6 hours, you go for 5 hours, you might think you're getting by, but you're not. And you're emotionally a little bit less, you're more volatile than you would be. And of course, it increases inflammation, which we talked about because we don't get to drain out that brain. That happens at night. And it messes with your weight if you have difficulty losing weight because of certain hormones that got situated. So the list of why sleep is helpful is never ending. But I just wanted to give you some kind of basics to start with, right? Your emotions, your brain, and your weight and inflammation. Okay, so we established that it's important. What are you doing during your day that's going to make your sleep up? Because people start thinking about sleep when it's time to sleep. It's 10 o'clock. They just had like an espresso martini and they're like, why can't I go to sleep? So you have to plan for sleep, just like you plan for weight loss, or you plan because you want to go to the gym, or you're planning for your kids' college. You have to plan for sleep. That means watch your caffeine intake after 12 o'clock. Coffee's fine before 12. After 12, it's going to be a sleep disruptor. That means your last meal shouldn't be this big, huge carb-loaded, big bowl of pasta with a glass of wine. Because what happens? You're going to feel sleepy initially. Oh, belly's full, relax. I had a glass of wine, I'm relaxed. And then 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, all that sugar gets processed. Guess what? You're awake. You're staring at the ceiling because your body's like, whoa, thanks for all the energy. What are we doing? Where are we going? Right? So we have to prep for that. What is our nighttime routine? Are we exercising and doing a high power exercise at 8 p.m.? You're not going to sleep after that because you just told your body to release a lot of cortisol. So where are we going after that? Are you watching news that's agitating you? Are you on social media and you're one of those people who are very, very like political, whatever side you're on, doesn't matter. So now you're like next level agitated. How are you going to sleep with that, right? So you have to take the steps in the hours leading up to sleep that will make you successful. So if you're having 2 espressos, you're watching the news, you know, you don't know, you had a hectic evening, all of a sudden you had a big meal, you're not sleeping. It's not happening. So you have to make these decisions hours before bedtime that you're going to be able to sleep. And then you create the environment, dark, cool environment, no noise. And then sometimes a sleep mask if you need it, yeah. And then sometimes we need supplements, but there's some stuff we can do without any supplements.
Yeah, that I know some people are really into supplements, others are not. And, I feel, let's talk about that a little bit. Just about the inflammation part of it. And you mentioned vitamin deficiency somewhere I saw, and that's a really big deal. And especially the vitamin D, I guess we could talk about it just a little bit, because I don't think people realize how that impacts our mood, our sleep, our microbiome, all of those things. So just briefly discuss the vitamin deficiencies you were talking about as they contribute to inflammation, and what should we be testing for?
Okay. So that's tricky. So my stance on supplements is that it's part of this complete breakfast, right? If you're smoking and eating McDonald's and then you're getting vitamin C, I mean, good for you, I guess. You're getting the vitamin C in, but like, is it going to overcome the smoking and the McDonald's? No, probably not. So there's no, just like I don't want you to have a magic pill, I don't want you to think there's magic supplements.
Right.
So first and foremost, have to clean up your diet and make sure you're putting the good stuff in and not getting the bad stuff out. And then I like to add supplements to it, because even on a perfect diet, it's still hard to get everything. So that being said, testing for supplement deficiencies is a little difficult. It's not necessarily, with exception of vitamin D, which we'll talk about, but it's not necessarily deficiency we're looking for. Like some people, I might want to give them some more B, not necessarily because they're deficient, but because they have a genetic SNP called MTHFR. So supplements are not always about deficiency. Sometimes it's about what is the goal we're trying to achieve, right? Like omega-3 pills. It's not necessarily because you're deficient. It's just super anti-inflammatory. So for some things, it's about the goal. But vitamin D is measured. Your primary is measuring your vitamin D, no doubt about it. So you want to measure your vitamin D levels, because everyone thinks vitamin D bones is my teeth. Right. Yes, it's your bones and your teeth, but it's actually a critical part of your inflammatory process. It's linked to poor infections, to poor outcomes in infections, which is why it was really popular in the COVID days. I'm not going to comment about COVID one way or the other, but it was really popular because low vitamin D is linked to poor outcomes in infections. So if you're fighting something, you've got to raise the vitamin D. So it has so many more benefits in the inflammatory world, way more than teeth and bones. And it is really hard to get it just with food. So we do want to measure it. The measurement is usually between 0 to 100. Close to 100 is a little too much. Under 30 is a big problem. I think 60 is where you want to be. And so if you ask me how much to take, it depends where you started. Right? If you're at 50, maybe you need 1,000 units a day. If you're at 2, you're going to need 50,000 units for a while to bring you up. But as soon as you stop taking vitamin D, it's going to go down again because you're using it. So it's one of those things you have to use all the time, every day.
Do you recommend supplementing with the K2?
Yes, I do recommend supplementing with the K2 because it helps the absorption. Thank you for bringing that up.
One question though, and this is honestly kind of a personal question about calcium. If you're supplementing with D and K2, you're increasing your calcium absorption, I believe. But do we still, as women, and even getting close to menopause, do you still recommend a calcium supplement, or what is your thoughts on calcium?
Yes, I do recommend a calcium supplement, especially for women for osteoporosis. We want to do everything we can not to get osteoporosis, because also we are higher risk. So I'm looking at you and myself. Thin Caucasian women will have a higher risk of osteoporosis. It's just kind of a demographic fact. So on the one hand, we're telling you to fast. On the other hand, are making you thin, which predisposes you to osteoporosis. So we really want to definitely increase the calcium. But again, it's patient dependent. If you are somebody who has kidney stones or some, right? So too much calcium is a problem for you. So we have to make sure that it's the right amount for the right patient. But the short answer is yes, take it.
Okay. I wasn't sure. I've been kind of on the fence about the calcium. I mean, I overall have tried to like back off on a lot of supplements because there's a supplement for everything. And I don't know. I just started thinking like, but I will talk about omega-3 briefly, that there's been huge research that just recently came out. I was just listening yesterday, like the benefits are huge on fish oil or omega-3s. I mean, however you want to get them. I guess you could mention a few other ways that you recommend getting omega-3s, because the research is really good on that being really important for anti-inflammatory and heart disease prevention and everything.
Yes, omega-3, we actually put it, so there are certain supplements that we kind of give almost to everyone. Omega-3 is one of them. So it's kind of like, we call it the basement, right? We have vitamin D, a multivitamin, omega-3, and NAC. That all of our patients get. And then we customize based on that, because omega-3 is such a huge component of anti-inflammation. And the standard American diet has an imbalance between 6 and 3. We have too much 6, which becomes pro-inflammatory, and not enough 3. So we have to help balance that. And omega-3, back to the brain. I mean, the brain needs the oils. It needs the omega-3. So when we're talking about brain protection, omega-3 is part of it. But to your point of how many supplements to take, it depends on what your priorities are and what your goals are, right? So some people, maybe they're athletic and they're doing a lot of wear and tear. So we really want to work on their collagen and their amino acids. Some people, it's really struggle them to sleep. So we're going to talk about more supplements about calming and melatonin and what else can calm them. Some people are super stressed. So just like the diet, it's not a one size fits all. It depends on what and sometimes it changes, right? Sometimes I'm giving people things that are specifically for their diabetes or their pre-diabetes. And that's no longer an issue because they've lost the weight and they've turned the number around. So now we're going to talk about their joint pain and maybe talk about turmeric. So don't be overwhelmed by it. And it's not more is more. Pick your 1 or 2 goals that you want to deal with right now. Take those supplements and you can always shift.
Right. All right. So we've got all this inflammation. What test are you running to detect our level of inflammation?
Okay. So 2 known tests is CRP and ESR. These are what we call non-specific inflammatory markers, meaning we don't know where the inflammation is. If it's high, is it in your knee? Is it in your brain? We don't know. It's non-specific, but it's elevated. So if it's elevated, it's a confirmation that we're dealing with inflammation. But if it's not elevated, that doesn't mean you don't have inflammation. It just means the markers didn't catch up. So if you feel inflamed and your ESR and CRP are inflamed, I don't care. We're still going to work on your inflammation and getting you feeling better. So it can empower you if it's there, but don't get discouraged if it's not there. So these are markers that in conventional medicine, they increase our risk for heart attack and stroke. If you have cholesterol and an elevated CRP, it's kind of fuel and fire. But in functional medicine, we're looking at them as like, hey, the body's on fire. What do we need to do to calm it down?
That's a good point. I feel like it's kind of like taking your body's temperature, like something's going on in there. Let's go with that. So what is your lifestyle prescriptions to decrease your inflammation? So sleep, diet, decrease stress. Is there anything else that we didn't talk about?
So those and some movement, of course, some movement. All of this can be done in moderation. So please don't go home and get mad at yourself for not making everything perfect, because that's stressful too. Forgive yourself.
Right.
For those of you listening, I'll give you later how to follow us, because next month I'm actually publishing a book and it's called It's Not in Your Head, because you always knew there was a better way. And what I do in that book is I empower people to try to do this on your own. So, removing the bad stuff, putting in the good stuff, getting some probiotics if we need it, and just repairing yourself. And I kind of give a basic protocol in there because I want you to feel better. And you don't necessarily have to do all this fancy testing and everything. So get the basics out, prioritize your sleep, get moving. That doesn't mean you need to join a gym. It doesn't mean you need to join CrossFit and lift like 4 million pounds. It just means walk around the block.
Right. Right.
And you start there, start simple.
I think keeping a daily log can be beneficial. I've read some research that actually people lose more weight when they keep a daily log. And gearing how you're feeling each day, I think is kind of good. It doesn't have to be like real, like, oh, you know, but just kind of tracking how you feel. I think if people could do that and bring it to you, you could kind of see like the trend or what, you know, different ways to help them, I guess.
So it depends. If you're someone like, I hate logging. So for me, it would feel like homework.
Yeah.
Some people love it.
Yeah.
But what we do to that end, because we track the symptoms before we meet, we ask them to, and they don't have access to their previous answers.
Okay.
So they're giving us how they feel in the past 2 weeks, and then we do a comparison. So it's a way of logging without asking them to log. Of course, it's not daily, but so we're able to track their progress that way. But yeah, if people are willing to log, it's super helpful, especially some of my more complex patients. Their logging really helps us pinpoint what's going on.
In your practice, do you check hormone levels or because hormones are huge in relation to how you feel? Do you guys check that or?
Yes. So the answer is yes and no. So we do an initial check through blood. But if I get to a point where I think hormones is the issue, and I'll tell you what I mean by that in a moment, then I will insist on saliva testing.
Okay.
So we do a basic, as part of our panel, we'll do some hormones, because if it's out of whack in your blood, it's definitely going to be out of whack in your saliva. So let's just classically take the premenopausal woman whose testosterone is really high, something that we call PCOS.
Okay.
That's actually an indicator that the patient's eating too much carbs.
Okay.
So that patient may not need hormone therapy. That patient just needs a better diet, and then the testosterone normalizes. Okay. Let's take the older gentleman with a little bit of a beer belly whose testosterone is low. Well, that beer belly, that fat is actually estrogen. So if we can get rid of the beer belly, the estrogen goes down, his testosterone will climb up. My postmenopausal women or my perimenopausal women who are feeling their heart palpitations and their sweats, and they're like, it must be my changes, it must be my hormones. Well, half the time clean up their diet and all those symptoms go away. So the point is, yes, we test for hormones, but we first try to normalize the hormones and the symptoms with lifestyle changes. Okay. Then 2-3 months later, if we're still not getting there, you still have the palpitations or the testosterone is still not where it needs to be, then I'll do saliva testing. And then I am a fan of bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. We titrate it to normal levels and, keep an eye on it through saliva. So the answer is yes, but I won't treat hormones until I clear the weeds first. Clear the weeds and then we plant the trees.
That's really actually a really big deal. I mean, I think that a lot of people are jumping into hormones lately. I've listened to so much and read, and it's like growth hormone even, and hurrying up and getting testosterone and all of these things, and they're not really realizing the long-term effects of starting these things prematurely or unnecessarily, possibly. I mean, they mess up a lot of things.
Yes,
they can done right.
Yes, they could do more harm than good for sure.
Right. Well, let's just briefly, you've been practicing for a while. You went from primary care to this holistic care model. And what has surprised you the most during your practice that you've come upon?
One of the things that surprised me, I ended up writing my PhD dissertation on, which is, so in our software, in our questionnaire, we ask all kinds of questions. And one of the questions was, do you have ringing in your ear? And I was like, why is this even in the software? Like, as far as I know, in medical school and nursing school, tinnitus, which is the fancy term for ringing in your ears, is permanent. Maybe you had it from a drug that you took or something, and there's nothing you could do about it. Have a nice day. And I didn't give it a second thought. I'm like, whatever, it's in here. I'll just move on with my day. And then my patients, the ringing in the ear started going away. I was like, what the heck is this? Consistently over time. And then I started doing research, and I realized that for a lot of people, tinnitus is actually inflammatory. So there's a population, of course, trauma, like my police officers, my soldiers, that's a trauma to the eardrum. That's not going to change. But people who have no trauma and just suddenly have this ringing in their ears for years, and they've gone to specialists over and over again. And then we change their diet, put on some supplements, and the ringing goes away. So tinnitus is actually an inflammatory process. If anyone here listening suffers or knows someone suffers, have them try an anti-inflammatory diet because it can change their life. So this was something I stumbled upon and I share it everywhere I go.
It makes total sense that it could be inflammatory. And interestingly, in the urgent care setting, during COVID, I was having a lot more patients with tinnitus, and I would prescribe them prednisone, which is a high dose anti-inflammatory. And so it does totally make sense that would be helpful.
Yes.
But of course, on my end, like you were luckily having the follow-up. For me, I didn't have any follow-up. If in the urgent care, it's like, did it help? I don't know. I didn't see him back, but also I told him to follow up with somebody. So that is so interesting and good to know, because fixing inflammation will help you live longer, feel better, have a better quality of life. But just like you do, getting to the root cause is so important, and people need to realize that there's hope for that.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what's about, giving people hope. Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah. Is there anything else that I didn't ask you that you feel is important for people to know?
Let's see. I think we covered most of it, but I just want people to know that there is a better way. And, whether you work with us or someone else, if you're not feeling well, don't give up. Find someone who will listen to you and find someone that can help you, because there's a way out of this.
Yeah, that's so good. When does your book come out?
I don't have an official date, so hopefully next month. We're in the last stages. So
okay, that's so exciting.
Thank you.
Now, do you work virtually, or where are you at, and do you work virtually?
So I'm in New York, but yes, I work virtually. So if you don't live in New York or any of the states that I'm licensed in, then we will send you the list of labs that we need. We'll send you the saliva kit. You just need to get that. And then the rest we can handle virtually. And it's a lot of fun. I have patients all over the country, and it's been so amazing.
Okay. So like you would just get charged a fee to visit. Now, do they see you, or do you have other associates?
So the initial discovery call, when we do go over the blood work and the saliva and all of that, is with me. Okay. Because I want to make sure that we put you on the right track, that we're not missing anything. And then I have a coaching team that helps with coaches, but the follow-ups are with me as well. But in between meeting me, you'll be talking to my coaches. So I don't do the weekly coaching calls, but we do the monthly meetings. And I have some patients who just want the coaching calls, but no matter what, I set up the initial plan for my patients.
Okay. So then they can just go to a local lab here.
Yes. We'll give you the list of what we need, and you can get it done. Yeah.
Cool. That's so cool. All right. Well, thanks for being here. And how does everybody find you and follow you?
Okay. So it's TheKnewMethod. Remember, new is spelled with a K. So TheKnewMethod. We're on Instagram. We have a Facebook, obviously website, TheKnewMethod.com, YouTube, TheKnewMethod by Dr. E, and TikTok, but you're not going to get that's too short. So anywhere you like, we're there, and we'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for talking to me. It's been fun, and I've learned a lot. So I hope everybody else has too.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, it's been fun.